Nobody move him! Not 1 inch! Sir, you are not on shift. You cannot be back here. Let the medics work.
There are no medics here yet. There is me. Feel his wrist. Go on, feel it. His breathing is slowing down because the muscles that run his breathing are shutting off.
If we wait for the ambulance to tell us that, he stops breathing on the floor of a snake house.
So take your hands off me and go hold the door open for the paramedics, because that is the useful thing you can do.
His name was Ezra Maddox. He was 46 years old, tall and lean, with reading glasses pushed up into hair going gray at the edges. He kept his right hand mostly out of sight, always out of habit, because the index and middle fingers ended at the second knuckle in smooth old scar. He fed the snakes. He cleaned the enclosures. 6 days a week, part of the day. He was the quietest man in the building. 9 days earlier, the curator had cut his hours for feeding the snakes wrong. Remember that, because none of what happened that afternoon makes sense without it. The phone on the floor said, "I need a species. I cannot help you until I know what bit him. Can anyone there tell me the species?" "Black mamba," Ezra said. "Adult, Dendroaspis polylepis. Dry weather. She was up in the branch when he opened the enclosure, and she got him twice on the back of the hand. First strike maybe 6 minutes ago." He pressed 2 fingers of his good hand to Trevor's throat. "Ma'am, are you recording this line?" A short pause. "Every call on this line is recorded. Who am I speaking with?" "Somebody who's going to keep this young man alive until you find me the right vials," Ezra said. "Now stay with me." That morning had started like a good one. Ezra had walked his daughter out through the front gate at 10, holding her hand, and Ren had talked the whole way. Ren was 8. She had a composition notebook that she filled with drawings of animals and their real names in careful print, and she knew more scientific names than most of the adults who worked there, because her father knew them and had never once talked down to her. She was, everyone agreed, the best thing about him. "Gaboon viper," Ren had said, testing him at the door of the education room. "Longest fangs of any snake." "Longest fangs of any snake," Ezra agreed. 2 inches, and the calmest temper in the building, which people never believe. "Yo, what? You always say the calm ones aren't the safe ones." "I always say that." He crouched to her level and fixed the strap of her little backpack. "You stay with Miss Ruthie in the education room. You draw me something good, and I get you it too. What's the rule?" "Stay where you say, and if I'm scared, get still and find a grown-up." She grinned. "You made that rule up so I'd never have any fun." "I made that rule up," he said, "because still is the first medicine. Go on." He watched her go into the bright room with the turtles and the safe little corn snake, and then he walked to Building 3 to feed a collection that, 9 days ago, had stopped being fully his to feed. The write-up had come from Dr. Warren Castellan, curator of herpetology, a man whose face was on the banner outside the reptile house because his face was on a cable program about dangerous animals. Castellan free-handled the venomous snakes for his camera. He lifted cobras with his bare hands for the lens, and he fed the hot snakes solo because it made better footage than 2 people working slow behind a shift box. Ezra had refused to feed that way. Ezra fed the venomous collection the way every serious institution in the country fed it, with tongs, behind a barrier, never alone in the room with a hot snake, prey thawed and offered clean. And when Castellan had told him to do it the other way for a segment, Ezra had said no, and had put in writing why, and Castellan had written him up for failure to follow the feeding directives of the curator and cut his hours to almost nothing. There had been a second memo too, from Ezra to the curator and to the veterinarian 3 weeks before. Ezra had checked the anti-venom locker, the way he checked it every month, even though no one asked him to, and he had found that the polyvalent anti-venom for the mamba, the specific product they were required to keep, had expired. He had written it up plainly. "We are keeping a snake whose bite stops a man's breathing, and we do not currently hold in date anti-venom for it. This needs to be corrected before anyone works that animal." Castellan had replied to that memo with one line. Noted, stay in your lane. It had not stayed on paper. Ezra had gone to find him, because a snake whose bite has no antidote in the building is not a thing you leave in an inbox, and he had caught Castellan in the corridor between the office and the camera lights. "Dr. Castellan, the mamba anti-venom expired in the spring. There is no in-date product for that animal in this facility. I can pull the exact lot numbers, but the short version is that if that snake tags anyone, we have nothing to give them." Castellan had not even slowed down. The Regional Poison Network coordinates anti-venom. That is what it is for. If there is ever an incident, we call them, they locate product, it comes. That takes hours, Ezra had said. Mamba venom takes the airway in under an hour. Ours is a body bag. We are supposed to hold our own supply for exactly that reason. It is in our own protocol, the protocol with your name on it. Castellan had stopped then, and turned and looked at the part-time man who cleaned the enclosures the way you look at a piece of equipment that has started making a noise. Let me explain something to you, because you seem to have forgotten it. I have run Venomous collections for 30 years. I have a wall of credentials and a program on television about exactly this. You feed the animals and you mop the floor. When I want the opinion of the man with the hose, I will ask for it. Until then, stay in your lane. And he had walked into the lights. The locker stayed as it was, because reordering the anti-venom was expensive and slow, and required the curator to admit that a part-time keeper had caught something he had missed, and Warren Castellan had built his entire life on the certainty that the man with the hose does not catch things the man with the credentials misses. So on that Saturday, short one experienced hand because that experienced hand had been cut to almost nothing, a 24-year-old keeper named Trevor Aldridge went in to feed the mamba by himself. Ezra was 2 rooms over, hosing down the tortoise yard when he heard it. Not a scream, a single hard word, and then the particular sound of a grown man sitting down suddenly on concrete because his legs had been told to. Ezra dropped the hose and ran. Trevor was on the floor outside the mamba enclosure, the feeding door still open, and he was holding his right hand against his chest and staring at it. 2 dark punctures on the back of it, close together, already weeping. "It got me," Trevor said. His voice was strange. "Ezra, it got me. My mouth feels wrong. My tongue feels wrong." "Look at me." Ezra was already on his knees. "Trevor, eyes here. Is the animal secured?" "I closed it. I closed the door. I think I closed it." "You closed it. Good. Now you're going to do exactly what I say and nothing else." He took Trevor's bitten hand and laid it low, below the level of the heart, and pressed his own maimed hand flat over the wrist, holding the arm still against the young man's thigh. "Stay still. Still is the first medicine. Every time you move that arm, you pump it through you faster. So we go slow, and we go low, and we breathe. With me. In. Out." He was already pulling his phone out with his other hand. He did not call the front desk. He did not call the curator. He dialed the number he had known by heart for 20 years, the national line, the one that answers day and night, and he put it on speaker and set it on the floor where he could keep both hands on Trevor. "Poison control, this is Dr. Vetter. I have a confirmed envenomation. Adult black mamba, healthy male in his 20s, 2 strikes to the dorsum of the right hand about 5 minutes ago," Ezra said. "He is showing early cranial nerve signs already, slurring, complaining his tongue feels thick. This one moves fast. I need you to start locating antivenom through the index right now, because I am telling you the antivenom in this building is expired and I do not trust it." There was a beat of silence on the line, the particular silence of a professional recalculating who she is talking to. "Say again your name and your role there," Dr. Vetter said. "My name doesn't matter for the next 10 minutes. What matters is that black mamba venom is going to take his breathing before it takes anything else, and antivenom is hours away no matter where you find it. So the whole game between now and then is keeping air moving. Does this facility have a bag valve mask in the Reptile House first aid station? Somebody. Yes or no?" "Yes," Trevor whispered. "Cabinet. By the sink." "Get it," Ezra said to the security officer who was still hovering, and something in his voice made the man go and get it. On the phone, Dr. Vetter had stopped arguing. "All right," she said. "I am pulling the anti-venom index now. Talk to me. What are you seeing?" And here's the thing the recording caught. The thing that mattered later more than anyone in that room could have known. For the next 40 minutes, a woman with a medical degree and a wall of references asked questions, and a man who fed the snakes answered every one of them before she finished asking. "Ptosis?" she asked. "Are his eyelids drooping?" "Left one already. Right one starting." "Any trouble swallowing?" "He stopped swallowing his own spit a minute ago. I've got him on his side." "Good. Keep him there. Blood pressure I cannot help with from here. Is he sweating?" "Soaked. And his belly is cramping, which is your mamba. That is exactly your mamba, so nobody in this room panic when he starts to look worse, because he is going to look worse before the antivenom, and looking worse is not the same as dying if we keep the air going." "Who taught you to run a mamba bite like this?" Dr. Vetter said, and it was not quite a question. "A lot of bad nights," Ezra said. "Where is my antivenom?" "Working it. The nearest in date polyvalent for this species is at a facility a long drive from you, and I am on with them now. You are looking at hours. You understand what that means for you on that floor. It means the anti-venom is not the rescue, Ezra said. The rescue is the next breath, and the one after that, all the way until the vials get here. I understand exactly what it means. He had understood it for 6 years. He had understood it in his sleep. The security officer came back with the cabinet kit and knelt, and Ezra talked him through it without slowing the count. Open the mask, the blue one. Squeeze the bag once so I can see it fill. Good. Now you're going to hold his jaw the way I show you, and I am going to breathe for him, and you do not let go of that jaw no matter what his face does. Can you do that? I can do that, the officer said, and to his credit, he did. Trevor's eyes had stopped tracking. His chest still rose on its own, but shallow and slower each time, the way a clock winds down when no one is turning it. The venom was doing the one thing that made this animal the thing it was, which was quietly switching off the signal between the nerve and the muscle, starting with the small muscles of the face and the throat and working its way inward toward the big muscle that pulls the breath. Talk to him, Ezra said low. He can still hear you. They hear you the whole way down. The phone crackled. I have located product, Dr. Vetter said. There is in date polyvalent antivenom for this species at a facility 3 states from you. They are pulling it now and arranging emergency transport. But I have to be honest with you about the time. Even under lights, even with everything moving perfectly, you are looking at something like 4 hours before those vials are in that young man's arm. Then 4 hours is what I am going to buy him, Ezra said. Tell your receiving hospital what is coming. He is going to need a ventilator and a bed and somebody who is not surprised by any of this. And ask them to have the anti-venom protocol pulled and ready, because when it arrives, it needs to go in fast and it needs to go in right. And half the mistakes with this happen at the very end, when everybody is tired and relieved and stops paying attention. You are describing the exact management I would give a resident, Dr. Vetter said slowly. How does a zoo groundskeeper know the failure modes of a mamba envenomation at the 4-hour mark? Ma'am, with respect, ask me that in 5 hours, Ezra said. Right now I have a keeper to breathe for. So the officer talked badly about nothing, about a ball game, while a man who fed the snakes held a broken hand flat against a young keeper's cheek and said the only liturgy he had. Stay still. Still is the first medicine. I have got you. I am not going anywhere. Next breath is mine. You just rest. Somewhere behind them, a door opened and a child's voice said, Dad, from very far down the corridor, high and frightened, because Wren had heard the radios and slipped Miss Ruthie's hand, and one of the education staff caught her at the turn and drew her back before she could see. Ezra heard it. Every muscle in him wanted to go to it. He did not turn his head. He had learned, at a terrible price, the difference between the person you love and the person whose next breath is currently yours, and he stayed with the breath. And it was the hardest thing in the room. It was during that call that Dr. Warren Castellan arrived. He came through the double doors in his khaki field shirt, the one with his name embroidered on it, and he took in the scene the way a man takes in a stage he believes is his. A keeper down, a part-time cleaner on the floor giving orders, a phone on speaker, and Castellan did the thing that would define him. The thing that came out of his deepest and most sincere belief about himself, which was that his authority was the thing keeping everyone safe, and that a disciplined subordinate running a medical emergency on the floor was not a rescue but a breakdown of order. What is he doing on my keeper? Castellan said. Get him back. Get him away. Trevor, look at me. We have a protocol. We do not need him. He crouched, reaching for the first aid kit, reaching for the wound. We need to cut and suction and get a tourniquet on this. High and tight, now. You put a tourniquet on that arm and cut that wound, Ezra said without heat, without looking up. And you will do more damage to this man than the snake did. No tourniquet, no cutting, no suction. That is 30 years out of date and it kills people. We keep the limbs still and low and we keep him breathing. Dr. Vetter, tell him. Whoever's treating this patient is correct, the phone said crisply. Do not apply a tourniquet, do not incise, do not suction. Pressure immobilization only. Keep him ventilating. Ambulance ETA? 6 minutes, a security officer said from the door. Castellan's face had gone a specific shade. To be corrected was one thing. To be corrected in front of his own staff, by the man he had written up for insubordination, with a stranger on a speakerphone agreeing with that man, in the building with his name on the banner, was something his entire sense of himself could not hold. He stood up. He is not qualified to touch this animal or this man, Castellan said to the security officer loudly for the room. He was disciplined for unsafe practice. Note that. Note the time. This is exactly the kind of reckless interference that gets people killed. Ezra kept both hands on Trevor and kept counting his breaths and did not answer him, because Trevor's lips were going blue at the edges and there was no part of Ezra left over for Warren Castellan. The paramedics came through the doors at a run. Ezra gave them the handoff in 15 clean seconds, species and time and progression and the fact that the airway was the whole game, and then he did something none of them expected. He got into the ambulance. "Sir, you can't." "Oh, I'm the only person here who has run this to the end before," Ezra said. "He arrests on the way. You want me in this box." He looked at the medic. "I will sit where you tell me and touch nothing you don't hand me, but I am not letting go of this one on the road." On the way to the hospital, Trevor stopped breathing. The younger medic saw the chest go still and reached for the drug box, fast, the way you're trained to. "He's apneic. I'm going to tube him. Get me the kit." "Anderson, you can try to tube him in a truck moving over railroad tracks with a jaw the venom has locked," Ezra said, already sealing the mask over Trevor's face. "Or you can let me bag him clean until we are stopped and lit, because a failed tube attempt costs him 90 seconds of no air and I am giving him air right now. Watch the chest rise. See it. That is oxygen going in. We do not need a hero move. We need the air to keep moving until the door. Call ahead. Tell them adult mamba envenomation, respiratory failure, being ventilated by mask. They need to be ready to intubate and support the second we roll in, and they need to have already started locating antivenom through poison control." The medic looked at the chest rising under the older man's steady, ruined hands and made the right call, which was to let him work and to key the radio. And the maimed hands that had failed once, 6 years before, in another vehicle, on another young man, kept the seal and squeezed, slow and even, breathing for a person who could no longer breathe for himself, all the way to the doors of the emergency department, where a team was waiting because a woman named Dr. Naomi Vetter had called ahead and told them exactly what was coming and exactly what to have ready. The antivenom reached the hospital 4 hours later, driven under lights from a facility 3 states away, located in 11 minutes by a toxicologist working the national index, while a snake feeder kept a young man alive on a garage floor and then in a moving truck and then in a resuscitation bay. Trevor Aldridge lived. He should not have, by the odds of it, bitten by that animal in a building holding no antivenom for it. But he lived because the one person the institution had decided it did not need had refused to leave and had known the only thing that mattered, which was that you keep the air moving until the medicine comes. For about 3 days, Ezra Maddox was quietly, privately, the reason a young man's mother still had a son. Then Warren Castellan gave a statement. It is worth understanding why he did it, because he was not, in the ordinary sense, a monster. Castellan genuinely believed the story he began to tell, or believed it fast enough that the difference did not matter. In his account, the near tragedy had a clear cause, and the cause could not be him, because he was the expert, the authority, the man who kept things safe. The cause had to be disorder, and the disorder in the building had a name and a face, a disciplined part-time employee who did not respect the chain of command, who had been written up for unsafe feeding practice, who had inserted himself into a medical emergency he had no license to manage, who had performed medical acts on a patient without any legal standing to do so. So that was the statement, that a disgruntled employee, recently disciplined for feeding the collection improperly, had a documented pattern of unsafe conduct, that his interference during the emergency, his unlicensed medical management of a patient, had endangered rather than helped, and that the good outcome had come in spite of him, from the professional systems that took over. He said it to the zoos board in a closed room with the director and the veterinarian present, and he said it with the ease of a man who had explained difficult things to cameras for a living. "I understand there's a temptation to make this man a hero," Castellan told the board. "I want to gently caution against it. What actually happened is that a disciplined employee, a man I personally wrote up for unsafe feeding practice, entered a live medical emergency and performed unlicensed medical procedures on our keeper. That is not heroism. That is liability. The fact that Trevor survived is a testament to the paramedics and the hospital, not to a man with a garden hose and a savior complex. If we celebrate this, we are telling every untrained employee in this institution that they may seize control of an emergency whenever they feel qualified. That is how people die." The veterinarian, Dr. Helen Ashby, had shifted in her seat. "The feeding right up. Remind me what the infraction actually was." "Insubordination," Castellan said smoothly. "Refusal to follow feeding directives. Helen, we do not have time to relitigate a personnel matter in the middle of a crisis. I need the board behind one clear message. And because he was the famous one, the one whose face was on the banner, the board got behind the clear message. The zoo, cooperating, suspended Ezra pending review. A prosecutor handed a tidy file, opened an inquiry into reckless endangerment and the unlicensed practice of medicine. The local paper ran it the way the file was built. Disciplined zoo worker under investigation after keeper's snakebite. The photograph they used was old and unkind. Below the fold, one sentence noted that the worker had recently been reprimanded for improper feeding of the animals, which every reader understood to mean that the snakebite was somehow his doing, that the man who fed the snakes wrong was the reason a snake had bitten someone. Allison called him that night. His former wife, who had left him for reasons that were real and were mostly this exact thing. The way trouble found him, the way he walked toward the worst version of every room. Ren's teacher saw the article, Allison said. Not cruel. Tired. There are parents. You understand what I'm telling you. If there is a criminal charge, Ezra, I cannot have her every other weekend in the middle of that. My lawyer will say things I don't want him to say. I kept a man from dying on the floor of that building, Ezra said quietly. I believe you, she said, and the terrible thing was that she did. But believing you has never once been the same as being able to protect you, or her, from what happens to you. He had Ren the next day, one of the last weekends before Allison's lawyer would start saying the things Allison did not want him to say, and Ren came in with her animal notebook and a question she had clearly been carrying all week. Somebody at school said you got fired for hurting a snake, she said, and that a man got bit because of you. I told them my dad would never hurt an animal, and that you know more about snakes than anybody. She looked at him with the terrible directness of an 8-year-old. But then I didn't know the rest. What's the rest, Dad? Ezra sat down at the little table across from her, the way he did when the truth was going to be complicated. A keeper got bitten by one of our snakes, he said. Not because of me, because the zoo did not have the right medicine on hand, and I had told them so, and nobody fixed it. When he got bitten, I was the person there who knew how to keep him breathing until the medicine came. So I did. He lived. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. And now the man in charge is telling everyone it was my fault. Because if it is my fault, then it is not his fault that the medicine was expired. That is the whole rest of it. So you saved him, Ren said, working it out. And they're saying you're the bad one, because the truth makes the boss look bad. Because the truth makes the boss look bad, Ezra said. That is exactly it. You understood it faster than the newspaper did. She thought about that. That's not fair. No, he agreed. It is not. But not fair and not true are different things. And the true part is still true even while the not fair part is winning. Hold on to that. Sometimes the true thing has to wait a while for its turn. He put her to bed on the little folding cot, and then he sat in the dark of his small apartment for a long time, and he looked at his right hand, at the 2 fingers that ended too soon, and he did the thing he had not let himself do in a long while, which was remember all of it. 6 years back, there had been a young man named Silas Monroe. Silas had been 26 and brilliant, and Ezra's to teach. He had followed Ezra through the anti-venom program the way a good student follows a good teacher, one step behind and catching up fast. On the night it happened, a private collector's snake had gotten loose at a call, and a child was in the room, and Silas had put himself between the child and the animal and taken the strike meant for no one. And Ezra had done everything, exactly the way he did it now, still and low and breathing, bag and mask, his own hands moving perfectly. But the anti-venom that should have been in the regional bank had been let expire, quietly, by a system that trusted the odds, and by the time the right vials came from far away, it was too late, and Silas had died of a bite that was survivable, over hours, while his teacher breathed for him and could not make the medicine appear. He could still hear the sound Silas made near the end, when the paralysis took the last of the breathing muscles, and there was nothing to make a sound with anymore, which was no sound at all, just a chest that stopped rising under Ezra's mask while the young man's eyes stayed open and aware and asking. Ezra had bagged him for 2 hours after any reasonable person would have stopped because he could not make himself accept that the medicine was not coming, that the medicine had been sitting expired in a locker 3 miles away, that a form someone did not sign had killed the best student he ever had. They had needed someone to hold responsible for a dead young clinician, and the someone had been the supervisor who was there, who had let a resident take a field call, who had his hands on the patient the whole time. The board did not much care that Ezra had filed, twice, warnings about that expired regional stock. Warnings on paper are easy to lose in a drawer, and a dead man in a hallway is not. Ezra had lost his standing and then his license and then, slowly, over the wreckage of it, his marriage, because Allison could not live inside a grief that large and a man who would not put it down. What almost no one knew was that at the same call, wrestling the animal off Silas, Ezra had taken a bite of his own to the hand, and had lost 2 fingers to the venom's slow killing of the flesh, and had come out of the worst night of his life, marked on the outside in a way everyone could see, and marked on the inside in a way no one could. It had made him, if anyone had cared to notice, the single most careful venomous keeper any institution could ever hope to employ. A man who checked an anti-venom locker no one asked him to check, who would not feed a hot snake the showman's way, who wrote memos into the silence because he had learned exactly what the silence costs, all of which was the very conduct Warren Castellan had filed as insubordination. He had gone to the snakes after that, not away from them, to them, because he still loved the animals, cleanly, and because feeding them and cleaning up after them was a way to be near the thing he was good at without ever again holding a human life in his ruined hands. And now he had held one anyway, and it had cost him, again, the only thing he had left, which was the ordinary right to pick his daughter up every other weekend. The person who undid Warren Castellan was not a witness, and not a courtroom, and not a confession. It was the fact, which Castellan had forgotten because men like Castellan do not think about the machinery underneath their authority, that the National Poison Line records every call. A state occupational safety investigator named Lorraine Petrie caught the case because a keeper had been critically injured on the job, and that triggers an inquiry whether a curator likes it or not. Petrie did what investigators do, which is pull records, and among the records she pulled was the recording of the emergency call, subpoenaed from Poison Control as a matter of routine. She sat in a small room with the zoo's veterinarian, Dr. Helen Ashby, and the director, Grant Ellery, and she played it. They heard a calm voice say Black Mamba, adult, 2 strikes, 5 minutes, cranial nerve signs already. They heard that same voice refuse a tourniquet and correct a curator and get told by a toxicologist that he was right. They heard unmistakably Warren Castellan's own voice arriving late and ordering the 2 treatments most likely to have killed the patient. And they heard the part-time cleaner keep a young man breathing for 40 minutes with the competence of a person who had done it 100 times because he had. Petrie stopped the recording. Then she opened a folder and read aloud, once and then again, the way you read something you cannot quite believe. An internal memo dated 3 weeks before the bite, from E. Maddox to the curator and the veterinarian, stating in plain words that the Mamba antivenom had expired and that no one should work the animal until it was replaced. And she read the curator's reply. Noted, stay in your lane. So, let me make sure I have the shape of this, Petrie said into the quiet. Your keeper was bitten by an animal you were keeping without in-date antivenom. You knew there was no antivenom because this man told you in writing, and you told him to stay in his lane. He then kept your keeper alive with no equipment and no antivenom until help came. And your response, after the fact, was to have him suspended and charged for it. Helen Ashby was looking at the memo in her hands. She was the one who broke. I approved the reprimand for the feeding, she said slowly. The one about him refusing to feed the way the curator wanted. Warren told me it was insubordination. I never asked what the feeding directive actually was. She looked up. The directive was to free-handle the hot snakes for the show. He wrote him up for refusing to do the unsafe thing, and I signed it. There was one more thing Petrie had, and she saved it for last because it changed the shape of the man at the center of the file. She had followed up with Poison Control, and she had spoken to the toxicologist who took the call, Dr. Naomi Vetter, and she read from her notes. Dr. Vetter told me that partway through the emergency, she realized she had heard this man work before. Not this man. His methods, the exact sequence, the exact refusals, the way he ran the airway as the whole event. She said, and I am quoting her, that there used to be a clinician in the regional envenomation program who trained half the toxicology fellows in the state and wrote the field protocol that Poison Control still hands out before he left the field after a resident died on a bad night. She said she spent the back half of the call almost certain she was talking to him. Petrie set the notes down. The man you had cleaning your enclosures wrote the protocol your curator was too proud to follow. Ashby closed her eyes. Where is he now? She said. Right now. Today. Suspended, Grant Ellery said quietly, because he was the one who had signed that. Under investigation. In the paper. His daughter's custody in question. He put his face in his hand for a moment. We suspended the man who saved Trevor, and we did it on the word of the man who nearly killed him. When they brought Castellan in and played him the recording of his own voice ordering a tourniquet and a blade, He did not crumble, because men who have built a whole self on being the authority do not crumble easily. He reached instead for the belief that had carried him his entire life. "You are all going to make a hero of a man who practiced medicine without a license on our keeper," he said. "Yes, the antivenom lapsed. That is a paperwork failure, and I will own the paperwork. But understand what you are actually celebrating. You are celebrating a groundskeeper deciding he knew better than the protocols, better than the chain of command, better than me, and taking control of a life. It worked this time. What about the next untrained man who thinks he is Ezra Maddox and gets it wrong? My authority in that building is not vanity. It is the thing that keeps a collection of animals that can kill people from killing people. Undermine it and you will bury someone. I was protecting the order that keeps everyone safe." "The order that keeps everyone safe," Lorraine Petrie repeated. "Let a lethal animal be worked with no antidote in the building because the man who caught the problem was beneath your notice. Your authority did not keep Trevor Aldridge safe, Doctor. It nearly killed him. The groundskeeper kept him safe. You have the two of them exactly backward, and you have had them backward the whole time, and that is not a paperwork failure. That is the whole failure. The reversal, once it started, moved the way the truth moves once it finally gets its feet under it, which is downhill and fast. The recording was not something Castellan could spin, because it was his own voice on it. The memo was not something he could bury, because it was already out of the drawer. The venom typing confirmed the species. The anti-venom locker confirmed the expiration. The picture assembled itself, and it was the exact inverse of the one Castellan had drawn. The charges against Ezra were dropped. The occupational safety citation landed instead on the institution and, personally, on the curator who had knowingly kept a lethal animal without the medicine for its bite and had punished the one employee who tried to fix it. Castellan's program did not survive the story. He resigned ahead of the board's review. He was, to the end, sincerely baffled, a man who had spent his life certain that his authority was the safety, and could not understand how the safety had turned out to be the quiet man he had cut down to almost nothing. Trevor Aldridge came to see him before any of the paperwork was finished, while Ezra was still suspended and the charge was still hanging over him. He came to the small apartment, thinner, his hand still wrapped, and he stood in the doorway and could not quite get the first sentence out. "They told me," Trevor finally said, "in the hospital, that you breathed for me in the truck, that my chest stopped and you kept it going the whole way in." He looked at Ezra's right hand, at the two short fingers, the way people had looked at it for years, except that he was not flinching. "I used to think you were just quiet. I used to think you were the guy who did the feeding by the book because you were slow. I told a joke about it once, to the other keepers." His voice cracked. "You did it by the book because the book is the only reason I am standing in your door." "Sit down," Ezra said, "before you fall down. You are 3 days off a mamba. You have no business standing in anybody's door." Trevor sat, and after a while, because he was young and needed to say it, he said, "Why do you let them treat you like this? You could have told everyone who you are, from the first day." "Because who I am," Ezra said, "is a man who lost someone he loved doing exactly what I did for you. I stopped telling people who I am the night that happened. Telling you now would not have kept you breathing. Being still and doing the work did." He almost smiled. "Turns out the two things were never as different as I made them." Ezra did no interviews. A reporter reached him once and asked how it felt to be vindicated, and he said only, "A young man is alive. That is the whole of how it feels," and hung up, gently, and did not answer again. He got Ren back for the following weekend, which was the only verdict he had ever actually wanted. He did not take her anywhere special. He took her to the reptile house early, before the gates opened, on a gray soft morning when the building was theirs and the animals were just waking. Trevor had asked him to come back, and the new interim curator, who was Helen Ashby now, had asked him to come back, and so he came back, and he brought his daughter, and they walked the quiet rows together in the low light. "Dad," Ren said in front of the mamba's enclosure, where the animal lay coiled and beautiful and entirely without malice, because it was only ever a snake. "Can I ask about your hand? The real answer." He had never given her the real answer. He had told her he heard it working, which was true and was nothing. He looked at the animal, and then he crouched down to his daughter's level, the way he had that morning at the education room door, and he laid his right hand out flat on his knee where she could see all of it, the two fingers that ended too soon. "A long time ago," he said, "before you, I had a job keeping people alive when snakes bit them, and I had a student named Silas who was young and good, and one night he got bitten saving a little kid, and I did everything I know how to do, and it wasn't enough because we didn't have the medicine we were supposed to have. And I got bitten too, that same night holding the animal off him. That is where the fingers went. He kept the hand still and open. For a long time, I couldn't do that work anymore. It hurt too much to hold a life in these hands and lose it. So I came to feed the snakes instead, where nobody's breathing was up to me. Ren looked at the hand for us a while. She was not afraid of it. She had never been afraid of anything he showed her without fear. She reached out and put her small hand into his ruined one and held it, the way you hold something you have decided is precious. But Trevor's breathing was up to you, she said, and you kept it going. I kept it going, Ezra said, and his voice was not entirely steady. Because you got still, Ren said, and did the first medicine. Because I got still, he said, and did the first medicine. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they stayed there a while in the gray light. The man and his daughter and the animal that meant nothing personal by any of it. And for the first time in 6 years, Ezra Maddox held a hand in his broken hand and did not lose anyone at all. There's a particular kind of person the rest of us are very quick to look past. He wears the uniform we have decided not to see, the one that cleans up after the exhibit rather than starring in it. When something goes wrong, he is the easiest man in the building to blame, because blaming him costs no one important anything. But sometimes the man feeding the animals is the one who spent a whole life learning to read the thing that is quietly killing you, and the only reason he is holding a hose instead of a life is that holding lives broke his heart once and he could not bear to do it again. Look at him before you decide what he is. When something is going very wrong and one calm person in a room full of experts is telling everyone to be still, it is worth asking, just for a second, where a man like that learned to be that calm. Because the answer is usually the worst night of his life. And the reason he is calm now is so that yours does not have to be.